The cafe was buzzing with activity on that warm, sunny afternoon. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of bread baking nearby. The small, cozy space was packed with people, some sitting alone, working quietly on laptops, others laughing and chatting over lunch with friends. Soft music played in the background, just loud enough to fill the space without drowning out conversation. At the center of it all was a young waitress moving steadily between tables. She carried trays with practiced ease, balancing drinks, plates, and napkins without a single wobble. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her uniform was simple but professional. Her smile was genuine, though faint lines of fatigue at the corners of her eyes hinted at the long hours she had already worked that day. Despite the rush, she remained calm, greeting each customer with warmth and attention, answering questions, taking orders, and ensuring that everyone felt noticed. She had been working in this cafe for a few years, and she knew the rhythm of the place better than anyone. She knew which tables were occupied by regulars who liked their coffee a certain way, which orders took longer to prepare, and how to navigate the crowded floor without bumping into customers or each other. It was a job that demanded patience, attention to detail, and a lot of energy, but she took pride in it. The morning had been hectic, but now, as the sun reached its peak, there was a brief lull. She took a moment to wipe down a table near the window and straighten the chairs. A small bell above the door jingled, announcing new customers entering. She looked up with her usual friendly smile, ready to greet them. That's when she noticed the biker. He walked in with a group of friends, all wearing leather jackets and sunglasses despite the indoor lighting. Their boots clicked loudly on the hardwood floor as they made their way to a corner table near the back. The leader of the group, the biker, stood out immediately. He had a commanding presence, his posture confident, chest slightly forward, and movements deliberate. There was a certain arrogance in the way he carried himself, as if the entire cafe existed to cater to him. He didn't smile, didn't nod at anyone, and didn't acknowledge the subtle glances of other customers. He exuded an energy that was both intimidating and commanding, and it made some of the regular patrons glance away quickly, preferring not to attract attention. The waitress approached the table with her usual polite greeting. "Good afternoon, welcome. Can I get you started with something to drink?" she asked, her tone professional and friendly. The biker looked at her slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly, and then smirked. "Yeah," he said in a low, deliberate tone. "But make it quick, all right? Don't want to wait forever." The waitress nodded, maintaining her composure. "Of course. What can I get you?" He waved his hand dismissively, clearly expecting her to take the hint. "Coffee, black, and make it strong. Don't mess it up." She jotted down the order with a practiced nod, keeping her expression calm. "Got it, I'll be right back with your drink." She moved quickly toward the counter, not letting his tone shake her. Once she was out of earshot, the biker leaned back in his chair, laughing softly and nudging his friends. "Looks like we got ourselves a rookie," he said. "Hope she doesn't ruin our coffee." One of his friends chuckled, but another shifted uncomfortably, sensing that things were about to get unpleasant. The biker's gaze swept the cafe, landing briefly on other tables as if asserting dominance over the space. He seemed to enjoy the idea that his presence alone could create tension. Back at the counter, the waitress carefully poured the coffee, ensuring it was the right strength, the right temperature. She added a clean napkin and a stirrer, then carried it back to the table with steady hands. "Here you go," she said, setting the cup in front of him with a polite smile. "Coffee, black and strong, just as you requested." The biker picked up the cup and took a slow sip, then let out a dramatic sigh. He said, louder than necessary, drawing the attention of nearby customers. "Not bad. For a beginner." His friends laughed, though a little nervously. The waitress maintained her composure. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm and even. "Is there anything else I can get for you right now?" He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table, and smirked. "Actually, yeah, you. What's your name?" The waitress hesitated for a fraction of a second, then replied politely, "I'm just your server today. How can I help you further?" The biker laughed again, louder this time. "No, come on. I like to know who I'm dealing with. What's your name?" Other customers at nearby tables started to notice the tension. Some whispered to each other. Others pretended to be busy with their phones or laptops. The air in the cafe grew heavier, filled with the quiet anticipation that something unpleasant was about to happen. The waitress remained professional, her voice steady. "I'm here to take care of your order, sir. That's my priority." He leaned back in his chair, clearly not satisfied. "Priority, huh? Let's see if you can handle it. I bet you're one of those servers who forgets half the orders. Maybe you've never even waited tables before." A few heads turned in the cafe. The waitress felt the eyes on her, some filled with sympathy, some with curiosity. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that staying calm was the best way to handle this. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but there was something different about him. His confidence and arrogance weren't just annoying, they were calculated to make her feel small. She approached the table again. "I assure you, sir, I'm experienced and I take pride in my work. If there's anything specific you'd like, I'll make sure it's taken care of promptly." The biker laughed, a loud, mocking sound that made a few patrons flinch. "Experienced? Don't make me laugh. Let's see if you can even bring my order without dropping it or spilling it on me." The waitress's hands remained steady, her smile unwavering. "I'll make sure your coffee stays exactly where it should." He leaned back, clearly enjoying the reaction he was getting from both her and the surrounding customers. "You know," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "most girls your age wouldn't even last 5 minutes in a place like this. But I guess you think you're special." A hush fell over the cafe. The words were meant to embarrass, to make her feel small in front of everyone, but she held her head high, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "I'm here to do my job," she said calmly, "and I'll continue to do it to the best of my ability." The biker smirked, leaning forward again. "You're cute when you're serious, but let's see how serious you are when things get a little difficult." His friends chuckled nervously, sensing the tension rising. The waitress, though calm on the outside, felt a flutter of anxiety. She knew she couldn't let the situation escalate, not for her own safety and not to upset the other customers. But the biker seemed determined to push boundaries, to provoke a reaction. The cafe had become quieter, not in absolute sound, but in the sense that every patron was alert, sensing the rising tension in the room. The biker, who had until now seemed untouchable, noticed the new presence, his eyes flicking toward the tall, imposing figure near the entrance. There was a moment, a brief pause, where he seemed to reconsider his actions. But arrogance and ego often overpower reason, and he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. The waitress, meanwhile, felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief because someone had entered who might intervene. Apprehension because she didn't know who this person was or how the biker might react. She stayed calm, keeping her hands busy on the counter and focused on her breathing, reminding herself that composure was her best defense. The biker's friends shifted uncomfortably. They exchanged glances, unsure whether to support him or to follow the silent cue from the new arrival. The leader, the biker, however, wasn't ready to yield. He raised his voice slightly, still attempting to dominate the scene. "Hey, what are you looking at? Mind your own business." The new figure didn't reply immediately. Instead, he walked slowly across the cafe, each step deliberate. His calmness was unnerving, commanding attention without aggression. Patrons turned their heads, some subtly whispering to each other, feeling the shift in the atmosphere. There was an almost tangible weight to his presence, a quiet authority that contrasted sharply with the biker's loud arrogance. The biker straightened, sitting up taller. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he barked, trying to reclaim control. His friends, sensing tension, avoided making eye contact with the newcomer. The waitress paused mid-step, holding a cup she had been about to carry, and glanced toward the man. She recognized him instantly, though she had never met him before. There was something familiar, almost legendary, about the figure. The tall man stopped a few feet away from the biker's table, standing so that his presence filled the space without physically touching anyone. He looked down at the biker with calm, steady eyes. "I'm someone who doesn't like to see people being mistreated," he said in a measured, confident voice. "Everyone deserves respect, and that includes her." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The biker blinked, taken aback. He had expected confrontation, maybe some nervous tension from the crowd, but this calm, unyielding authority was different. He leaned back in his chair, trying to mask his unease with a scoff. "And who are you supposed to be? Some kind of hero?" The newcomer's eyes remained steady, unmoved by the insult. "Call it what you want." "I call it common sense," he replied. His tone was firm but not loud, commanding attention without shouting. "She is working hard. You do not get to make her feel small." For a moment, silence fell over the cafe. The other customers watched, some holding their breath. Even the biker's friends seemed unsure of what to do, realizing that the situation had escalated beyond their control. The biker's smirk wavered. His confidence, which had filled the room moments ago, began to falter. The waitress stood behind the counter, trying to maintain calm. She felt a mixture of relief and awe. The new arrival had interrupted the situation without hostility, yet his presence alone carried authority. She could feel the tension in the room shifting, and for the first time in minutes, she felt that maybe the ordeal would end without her having to do anything further. The biker, however, was not ready to back down. "Listen," he said, his voice trying to regain bravado. "This isn't about her. She just happens to be in the way. Don't think you can come in here and tell me what to do. I pay for my coffee and I get to say what I want." The newcomer shook his head slightly, his expression calm but firm. "You're mistaken," he said. "Paying for something does not give you the right to disrespect another person. What you're doing isn't normal, it's wrong, and it stops now." The biker leaned forward, glaring. "Wrong? You don't even know me. Who the hell are you to tell me what's right and wrong?" The man's calmness never wavered. "I am someone who believes in standing up for what's right," he said. "I don't need to know you personally. I just need to know that what you are doing is unfair. You are harassing someone who is simply doing her job." The biker's friends shuffled in their seats. The tension was thick. He could feel eyes on him, not just from the newcomer but from the rest of the cafe. There was a collective sense of anticipation in the air. Everyone was waiting to see what he would do next. The biker, who had been so confident moments ago, realized that he might have underestimated this man. "I don't need lectures," the biker muttered, trying to sound defiant, but his voice lacked the certainty it had held before. He glanced around at the other customers, noticing the quiet disapproval. No one was cheering, no one was laughing. Everyone was watching him, waiting. That feeling, that scrutiny, was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. The newcomer, without moving closer, tilted his head slightly and said simply, "You can leave the cafe if you want to continue your attitude, or you can stay and treat her with respect. The choice is yours." For a moment, the biker was silent. His friends exchanged nervous glances, realizing that this was no longer a casual joke. This was serious, and the rules had changed. The calm authority in the man's voice, the steady eyes, the way he filled the space without aggression, it was disarming. The waitress, sensing the moment, remained behind the counter, hands folded loosely in front of her. She was cautious but curious, observing how the situation would resolve. She had faced difficult customers before, but she had never seen someone command a room with such subtle power. The biker's smirk wavered again. "You think you can scare me?" he asked, trying to regain some control. "You think showing up all big and tough will make me change?" The newcomer's expression didn't change. He leaned slightly forward, just enough to make the biker notice his focus, and said calmly, "This isn't about scaring you. This is about making sure you understand boundaries. Harassment stops here. If you want to enjoy your coffee, do it respectfully. Otherwise, it's time to leave." The biker's friends shifted uneasily. They realized that backing him up might only worsen the situation. One of them murmured something under his breath, clearly questioning their own role in the confrontation. The biker, suddenly aware of the attention from everyone in the cafe, felt a rising panic. This wasn't what he had expected. He had planned to dominate the room, to embarrass the waitress and to assert his ego without resistance. Instead, he was being confronted calmly, decisively, and with authority he hadn't anticipated. "Fine," he said finally, his voice tighter than before. "But don't think this changes anything." The newcomer didn't respond with anger or aggression. He simply nodded as if to say, "I'm done here. The decision is yours." The silence that followed was heavy, but the biker could feel the shift. He knew he was no longer in control. The tension he had tried to create had evaporated under the quiet strength and authority of this man. The waitress, finally allowed a small sigh of relief, continued her work behind the counter. She felt grateful but also humbled. She realized how much courage it took to confront someone who, the cafe remained charged with tension, the kind that made every movement seem amplified. The biker sat at his table trying to maintain his composure, but it was clear that the arrival of the tall, calm man had shaken him. His friends shuffled awkwardly in their seats, sensing that their leader had underestimated the situation. No one had spoken in a while, and the soft hum of the cafe's music could barely mask the intensity of the room. The waitress had returned to her tasks, moving carefully among the tables, her heart still racing. She could feel the lingering weight of the biker's arrogance pressing down on the space around her. But she also noticed the quiet authority of the man who had entered. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't pushed, he hadn't made threats. Yet in the few moments he had spoken, the entire dynamic of the cafe had shifted. The biker took another sip of his coffee, trying to convince himself that he still had control. He leaned back in his chair, resting his arms on the table, and forced a grin. "All right," he muttered to his friends. "Maybe he thinks he's tough. Doesn't scare me." But even as he said it, there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He couldn't ignore the way the man had filled the room, the calm way he had spoken, and the quiet confidence that radiated from him. The newcomer, sensing that the biker had not yet fully grasped the seriousness of the situation, took a step closer. His movements were measured and deliberate, and he spoke again, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made everyone in the cafe listen. "You need to understand something," he said. "Respect is not optional. It's a basic human expectation. You are not above anyone here. You do not get to humiliate people for no reason. This stops now." The biker's smirk faltered again. He leaned forward, his voice rising slightly. "And what are you going to do about it? You think walking in here and talking like that changes anything? You don't know me. I can handle myself." The newcomer didn't respond with anger or aggression. He stood tall, shoulders squared, and spoke with a quiet certainty that made the biker hesitate. "I don't need to know you personally. I only need to know that what you're doing is wrong. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. That includes her, and that includes everyone else around you. Your attitude has no place here." For a moment, the cafe was silent. Patrons leaned slightly forward in their chairs, watching the confrontation unfold. Some whispered to each other, their voices low, expressing surprise at the calm but firm stance of the newcomer. The biker's friends exchanged nervous glances. Even they could feel that this was no longer just about a joke or a show of arrogance. The stakes had shifted. The biker's ego bristled at the challenge. He clenched his fists lightly as if preparing to assert himself, but the newcomer's steady gaze held him in check. There was no fear, no hesitation, only calm authority that left no room for further arrogance. "You think you can intimidate me?" the biker said finally, attempting to regain control. "I've dealt with tougher than you." The newcomer's eyes didn't waver. He leaned slightly forward, just enough to make the biker aware of his focus, and said clearly, "This is not about intimidation. It's about accountability. You are responsible for your actions. You are responsible for the way you treat others, and right now you are failing at that." The words hit harder than the biker expected. There was no yelling, no aggressive posturing, just a calm statement of truth. For the first time, the biker realized that his usual tactics, his loud voice and confident smirk, were ineffective. He had encountered someone who refused to be intimidated and refused to be silent in the face of disrespect. The waitress, standing a few feet away, felt a wave of relief. She realized that the newcomer had shifted the energy of the room without raising his voice, without threatening anyone physically. The tension that had gripped her shoulders began to ease. She could breathe more freely now, knowing that the situation was under control. The biker's friends shifted in their seats, unsure of how to respond. They had come to support their leader, but they could see clearly that the power dynamic had changed. The biker, sensing their unease, tried to speak again, but the words came out weaker than he intended. "You don't scare me," he said, forcing a laugh, but it was hollow. His confidence, which had filled the room moments ago, was fading. He glanced around at the other customers, noticing their quiet attention. No one was laughing. No one was smiling at his antics. Everyone was watching, waiting, observing. The newcomer tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady, and said softly, "It's not about fear. It's about respect. You have a choice. Continue this behavior and leave, or adjust your attitude and treat people with dignity. The decision is yours." The biker's friends leaned toward him, whispering quickly, urging him to calm down or leave. He could feel the weight of the entire cafe's attention pressing on him. His usual bravado, the arrogance that had carried him through so many situations before, was no longer enough. The waitress, her hands now resting lightly on the counter, watched intently. She could see the biker's inner struggle, the clash between his ego and the undeniable authority of the newcomer. She felt a mixture of gratitude and admiration for the calm intervention, recognizing how effective it was in protecting her without escalating the situation. The biker finally took a deep breath, as if trying to reclaim some sense of control. "Fine," he muttered, his voice tight. "Maybe I got carried away. Maybe I overstepped." His friends nodded quickly, clearly relieved that the confrontation was not escalating further. The newcomer didn't respond with triumph or aggression. He simply nodded, maintaining his calm presence. "Acknowledging it is the first step," he said. "Now let's move forward. Everyone deserves a respectful environment. That includes this cafe, this waitress, and everyone in it." The biker looked around the cafe, noticing the patron's quiet approval and the subtle sense of respect that had shifted toward the newcomer. For the first time he felt small, not physically but in terms of his attitude and behavior. His usual tactics of intimidation had failed, and he realized that this man had not only neutralized the situation, but had also restored order and dignity. The waitress, feeling the tension ease completely, returned to her duties with renewed confidence. She carried drinks to other tables, took new orders, and smiled genuinely at customers, her movements steady and unhurried. She had witnessed firsthand how calm authority, clear communication, and moral courage could diffuse a difficult situation. The cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm after the biker and his friends left. The lingering tension, which had gripped every patron just minutes before, began to fade like mist under the morning sun. The quiet hum of conversation gradually resumed. The clinking of cups and plates filled the space, and the faint aroma of coffee once again became the dominant presence in the room. For the waitress, the relief was palpable. She leaned against the counter for a brief moment, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. Her hands were steady now, but she could still feel the echo of her racing heart. The ordeal had been intense, and though it had ended without any physical confrontation, the mental strain had been real. She was reminded of the unpredictability of her job, the way ordinary days could shift into high-pressure situations in an instant. Her colleagues, who had been quietly observing from various points in the cafe, came over to check on her. Their voices were filled with concern and admiration. "Are you okay?" one asked, adjusting a chair nervously. Another offered a smile, saying, "You handled that really well. That could have gone a lot worse." She nodded, still taking a few deep breaths. "I'm fine," she replied softly. "It's just a lot to process. I didn't know what would happen next." She glanced toward the entrance where John Cena had left, and a small smile appeared on her face. She felt a sense of gratitude she struggled to put into words. She had never met him before, yet his presence had changed everything. He hadn't shouted or pushed anyone. He hadn't needed to. His calm authority had been enough to restore order and dignity in the cafe. As the patrons returned to their meals and conversations, subtle whispers circulated about the incident. "Did you see what just happened?" someone murmured to a friend. Another customer shook their head, saying quietly, "I've never seen someone handle a situation like that so calmly. It was incredible." Even though the event had concluded, its impact lingered. It was a reminder that courage could take many forms, not always loud or confrontational, but still powerful. The waitress continued her work, moving between tables with renewed focus. She noticed small gestures from patrons who had observed the incident, smiles, nods of appreciation, and subtle acknowledgments. These interactions, though quiet, reinforced her sense of connection to the people around her. She realized that her work, often seen as ordinary, could intersect with extraordinary moments, and that even her presence mattered in ways she hadn't fully recognized before. As the afternoon continued, she found herself reflecting on the chain of events. The biker's arrogance had initially made her feel small, undermined, and exposed. He had attempted to assert dominance not through reason, but through intimidation and disrespect. Yet the intervention by John Cena had demonstrated an important truth. Courage and authority need not be aggressive to be effective. Sometimes the calm, deliberate presence of someone willing to stand up for what is right can be far more powerful than any threat or display of ego. She also reflected on her own role in the incident. Though she had maintained composure throughout, she recognized that her calmness had been reinforced by the support of an unexpected ally. It was a lesson she would carry with her. Standing firm in one's dignity is essential, but seeking or accepting help is not a weakness, it is a sign of wisdom. Meanwhile, the cafe manager approached her with a gentle smile. "You handled that incredibly well," he said quietly. "I know it wasn't easy. I hope you understand how much respect you earned today, not just from me but from everyone here." She nodded, feeling both pride and humility. "Thank you," she said. "I just tried to stay professional and do my job. I wasn't sure what would happen, but it's over now." The manager rested a hand briefly on her shoulder. "It's more than just your job. You protected yourself, maintained dignity, and set an example for everyone here. That takes courage." Her eyes softened and a small smile appeared. "I guess it does, doesn't it?" she said. "I never thought I'd be in a situation like this in a cafe of all places." The manager chuckled softly. "Life has a funny way of putting us in unexpected situations. The important thing is how we respond." The afternoon continued, and gradually the energy in the cafe returned to normal. Patrons resumed their conversations, laughter returned to some tables, and the soft background music regained its presence. Yet beneath the surface, the events of the past hour left a subtle imprint. People were more attentive, more aware of the human interactions around them. They had witnessed a moment of courage and calm intervention, and it had reminded them of the importance of respect and dignity in everyday life. The waitress found herself reflecting on the lessons she had learned. She realized that kindness, patience, and composure were not just personal virtues. They were tools that could influence the environment around her. Her ability to stay calm under pressure had been essential, but the presence of someone willing to intervene on her behalf had amplified the impact. She understood now that human connection and support could transform tense situations into opportunities for growth, understanding, and mutual respect. As the cafe approached the late afternoon, a few customers lingered, finishing their drinks and pastries. The waitress moved among them, carrying trays and clearing tables, her movement steady and confident. She noticed small interactions, a smile exchanged between friends, a child laughing at a story a parent was telling, a couple quietly holding hands across the table. These moments reminded her that the world, though sometimes challenging, was also filled with small acts of kindness and connection. Her thoughts returned to the biker and his friends. She realized that their behavior, though unpleasant, had inadvertently created an opportunity. It had allowed her to witness firsthand how courage, calm authority, and moral clarity could shift the dynamics of a room. She also recognized that those who act arrogantly often underestimate the impact of quiet strength and integrity. Later, as she wiped down a table near the window, she noticed one of the patrons who had observed the incident earlier. He gave her a small nod and a smile, as if acknowledging her composure and strength. She returned the nod, feeling a quiet sense of affirmation. It wasn't about recognition or praise, it was about knowing that she had maintained her dignity and handled a difficult situation with grace. The cafe owner, who had been watching the situation unfold from the back, approached her as the day began to wind down. "I want to thank you," he said sincerely, "not just for your work, but for the way you handled that. You kept calm, professional, and confident. That's not easy, especially when someone is trying to intimidate you." She shook her head slightly, humility in her expression. "I just did my best," she said. "I wasn't sure what would happen, but I knew staying calm was important." The owner smiled, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder. "It's more than just staying calm. You showed strength, patience, and professionalism. Those are qualities that matter, not just in this cafe, but in life." As the evening approached, the evening settled softly over the cafe, with the sun casting long golden rays through the windows. The hustle and bustle of the day had faded into quiet contentment. The air smelled faintly of coffee, pastries, and the gentle aroma of cleaning supplies. Chairs were stacked on tables in preparation for closing, and the few remaining customers lingered, finishing drinks or quietly chatting. The earlier tension, which had gripped the cafe like a storm cloud, was now replaced by a sense of calm, almost a gentle relief that everyone could feel. The waitress moved carefully around the cafe, wiping down counters, straightening chairs, and collecting stray napkins from tables. Her movements were deliberate and unhurried, a contrast to the rush of energy that had filled the space earlier. Her mind, however, was not entirely on her tasks. It kept returning to the events of the afternoon, the confrontation, the calm authority that had intervened, and the way the atmosphere had shifted so quickly. She remembered the biker's arrogance, the way he had tried to assert dominance over the cafe, and how he had singled her out as if she were simply an obstacle to his ego. His behavior had been aggressive but more subtle than violent. He had relied on intimidation, words, and the gaze of a crowd to try to make her feel small. She had felt the pressure, even the subtle fear, but she had stayed calm. Her training, experience, and determination had helped her maintain composure. Yet she knew that without the timely intervention of the tall, calm man, the situation could have escalated in ways that she couldn't have handled alone. The man's presence had been striking, not because of loud gestures or threats, but because of quiet authority. His calm voice, steady gaze, and confident demeanor had shifted the energy of the room almost instantly. The biker, who had previously held all the power, had been reduced to uncertainty, his smirk faltering, his bravado fading. It had been a powerful lesson in how strength is not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it is quiet, controlled, and measured, and that kind of strength can be far more effective than intimidation or force. The waitress found herself reflecting on her own role. She had done her best to remain professional, polite, and composed. She had not argued, shouted, or tried to match the biker's aggression. Instead, she had relied on her own dignity and the authority of professionalism. She realized now how much power there is in staying calm, standing firm, and not giving someone the reaction they want. The presence of an ally had amplified that effect, but her own response had been essential. She had faced the challenge without losing herself, and that, she thought, was an important victory. The cafe manager walked by, quietly checking on her. "You did really well today," he said, his voice warm. "I know it wasn't easy. Most people would have been shaken, but you handled yourself with grace." She nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I was nervous, of course, but it worked out." The manager smiled. "It did, and you should remember that your professionalism played a huge part. The calm authority that stepped in helped, yes, but your composure made the intervention effective. You stayed steady when it mattered most." Her thoughts turned back to the patrons who had watched everything unfold. Many of them had been regulars familiar with the rhythms of the cafe, but even they had been affected by the incident. She recalled the subtle nods of approval, the whispered comments, the small smiles that acknowledged her strength and composure. It was humbling to realize that even in moments of tension, human connection and empathy quietly observed and appreciated her efforts. As the cafe emptied, a sense of normalcy returned. Chairs were pushed in, the floor was swept, and the sound of cleaning filled the quiet space. The waitress moved methodically, her mind processing the lessons of the day. She thought about respect, dignity, and the importance of standing up for oneself. She also thought about the power of allies, people who step in to help when needed, not to dominate but to restore balance and fairness. Later, after the cafe had closed and the lights dimmed, she stood at the front window, looking out at the empty street bathed in the soft glow of street lamps. She reflected on how quickly situations could change. One moment the cafe had been tense, filled with the weight of intimidation and potential conflict. The next moment, thanks to calm, steady intervention and her own professionalism, order and dignity had been restored. It struck her how fragile yet resilient human interactions could be. One person's actions, combined with another's courage, could transform an environment entirely. Her thoughts wandered to the biker and his friends. She wondered if they had realized the lesson they had been taught, not through anger or physical confrontation, but through calm, measured authority and respect for others. She hoped they understood that arrogance and disrespect do not win respect, and that true strength often comes from self-control and consideration for others. She remembered the expressions on the faces of other patrons, the mixture of surprise, admiration, and relief. The incident had become a quiet teaching moment for everyone present. It reminded her that people are always watching, and that moments of courage and integrity, even small ones, can ripple outward, influencing others in ways we might not immediately realize. As she finished cleaning the last few tables, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about the way fear had been present but manageable, how tension had filled the room, and how the calm intervention had transformed the dynamic entirely. It was a reminder that power does not always belong to the loudest or most aggressive. True authority and influence often come from steady, measured actions rooted in respect, fairness, and dignity. The waitress gathered her belongings, preparing to leave for the evening. She paused at the door, taking one last look around the cafe. The familiar space once filled with tension now felt peaceful, almost serene. The sunlight had faded, replaced by the soft glow of the cafe lights reflecting on the clean surfaces. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not just in her work but in how she had handled herself in a challenging situation. As she stepped out onto the empty street, the cool evening air was refreshing. She walked slowly, reflecting on what had transpired. She realized that life often throws unexpected challenges our way, testing our patience, courage, and composure. How we respond to those challenges defines not only the outcome of the moment, but also shapes who we become. She thought about the lessons she had learned, that standing firm in dignity is powerful, that calm authority can diffuse tension, that allies who intervene thoughtfully can change outcomes, and that even ordinary people can witness and benefit from acts of courage. She understood that these lessons were not limited to cafes or workplace interactions. They applied to life in countless ways, from family and friends to strangers and community interactions. The memory of the newcomer's calm, measured presence stayed with her. She realized that courage is not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it is quiet, deliberate, and focused. It is the ability to act with integrity, even when others are being difficult or aggressive. She understood now how effective that kind of courage can be, and how it can inspire confidence and respect in others. As she continued walking, she noticed small gestures in the world around her, the kindness of a stranger holding a door, the patience of someone letting another merge in traffic, the small smile exchanged between friends on the sidewalk. She realized that these everyday moments, though seemingly minor, carry a quiet power similar to what she had witnessed in the cafe. Human connection, respect, and integrity are threads that weave through life, often unnoticed but profoundly impactful. By the time she reached home, her mind was calm, though her heart still carried the echo of the day's events. She made herself a cup of tea, sitting by the window and reflecting further. The experience had been intense, but it had also been a reminder of resilience, dignity, and the quiet power of calm intervention. She felt grateful, not just for the protection she had received, but for the opportunity to witness and participate in a moment that reinforced the values she held important. She understood now that life often presents moments that test our patience, courage, and integrity. And in those moments, how we respond, whether with calm composure, respectful firmness, or supportive intervention, can leave lasting impressions on ourselves and those around us. As night fell, she finally allowed herself to relax fully. The cafe, the patrons, the confrontation, they were all part of an experience that had tested her, taught her, and ultimately strengthened her. She felt a sense of quiet pride, knowing that she had faced the challenge with dignity and had learned lessons that would remain with her for a long time. And though the events had ended, she carried them forward in her mind as a guide, a reminder that courage, respect, and human connection have the power to transform moments, relationships, and even environments. That even ordinary days can become extraordinary when people act with integrity, calm, and a willingness to support one another. With a final sip of her tea, she leaned back and smiled softly. The day had been difficult, unexpected, and memorable, but it had also been a testament to human resilience, kindness, and the quiet strength that exists in every person, waiting to be called upon when needed most. The lessons of the day would stay with her, quietly shaping her understanding of courage, dignity, and respect, and she knew in her heart that the ripple of those lessons would extend far beyond the walls of the cafe, touching lives in small but meaningful ways. One moment, one choice, one act of integrity at a time. The cafe began to empty, and the soft glow of the setting sun filtered through the windows. The waitress took a moment to glance around the room, reflecting on the day's events. She felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and pride. She had faced a difficult situation, maintained her dignity, and witnessed an example of courage and authority that had left a lasting impression on everyone present. She thought about the lessons she had learned, that calmness,